What's going on, baseball fans? How you doing? So we're pretty close to spring training. I think it's safe to say that we've seen pretty much all the offseason has to offer. Could there be another move? Sure. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and give my off-season grades. Let's go talk about it. Before I get started, if you are new to the channel, think about subscribing down below so you can help us get to 30K by opening day. Hit the like button, the bell button, the share button. Hit all the buttons. Okay, here we go. Let's start off with the Arizona Diamondbacks. They made a couple of free agent signings, Evan Longoria, Zach Davies to one-year deals, but most notably, they made a big trade. Dalton Varsho heading over to the Toronto Blue Jays, and in return, they got Gabriel Moreno, a future stud at the catcher position, and Lourdes Gurriel Jr. That should bring a little bit of offense back to the Diamondbacks lineup with Varsho now in Toronto. Don't forget about Kyle Lewis. They got him from the Mariners. With the Diamondbacks, I think they had an okay off-season. I love the addition of Gabriel Moreno, but I feel like they just didn't make an impact move for the team now, especially in this division, man. It's going to be one of the toughest divisions in all of Major League Baseball. So I like the moves they made, but I feel like they just didn't do enough. So for right now, I'll go C for the Arizona Diamondbacks. Moving on to the Atlanta Braves, 2 years now removed from a World Series championship, but they had themselves a pretty decent offseason, just like the Diamondbacks, most notably a trade headlined their offseason. Sean Murphy coming over from the Oakland A's, but not just trading for Sean Murphy, signing him to a 6-year deal. They also signed Spencer Strider to a 6-year contract as well. The Braves are just so good at doing these extensions. As for free agency, they made a couple of additions. You brought in some bullpen help with Nick Anderson, Jackson Stevens, a couple of minor league deals like Yaxel Rios. Let's see if they can get him on track. But other than that, not a whole lot. They lost Dansby Swanson and Kenley Jansen. So those are two pretty big subtractions. So in the end, I think the Braves, getting a catcher like Sean Murphy was absolutely fantastic, along with signing him to an extension, getting Spencer Strider into locked up to an extension as well. A pretty solid offseason, in my opinion, for the Atlanta Braves. I'm going to go with a B. On to the Baltimore Orioles. I'm going to be honest, I'm a little disappointed with the Orioles offseason. I was hoping they would land a big name, someone like Carlos Correa. I thought he would have been a great fit for the Baltimore Orioles. But in the end, they just made a couple of low-key moves. They're sticking with the plan. They're sticking with the rebuild. But they did make some additions. Kyle Gibson, they signed up in free agency to a 1-year deal. That's going to bring some innings to their rotation. But they also traded for Cole Irvin not too long ago. They didn't have to give up a whole lot for him. They got Cole Irvin. This guy's locked up until 2027. He gave you a lot of innings last year. Of course, he's not going to be a front end of the rotation kind of a guy, but a guy that can give you innings, and that's what I think the Orioles need. And all they really had to give up was just one minor leaguer, Darrell Hernandez. He could end up being a star down the road, but he didn't show too much in Double-A last year, showed more in Single-A. Let's see if he can take his game to the next level in Double-A. But other than that, not a whole lot going on for the Baltimore Orioles. I really feel like they could have done a bit more. Adam Frazier was another one, left him out. A veteran guy. I think that veteran presence will help out the Orioles. Let's see if he can get back to those numbers that he was putting up in Pittsburgh. But, I'm a little disappointed with what the Orioles did. I'm going to go with a D. Moving on to my Boston Red Sox, and the biggest story for the Red Sox this offseason was Xander Bogaerts heading to the San Diego Padres. That left a lot of Red Sox fans quite grumpy, but to be completely honest with you, I was okay with letting him go. Why? Because he got 11 years. I did not want to bring back Xander Bogaerts for 11 years. Those contracts always end up not being great towards the latter half of the deals. So I was okay with him moving on. So instead of paying Xander Bogaerts that money, they ended up signing Rafael Devers long-term. This was a no-brainer to me, 10-year deal. Rafael Devers is one of the best bats in the game. I'm glad they locked him up. Now, for free agency, I think they really made some solid additions. The big one out of all of these was Masataka Yoshida. A bit of a question mark, but I really do trust his ability. Very similar numbers to Ichiro, especially when it comes to the on-base percentage. I think he is going to be really good in the major leagues. The Red Sox needed some outfield help, and I think he's going to be a really solid addition. I think he could end up being one of the better leadoff hitters in the game. Now, you also added some pieces for the bullpen. You got Kenley Jansen, Chris Martin, and Joely Rodriguez. The Red Sox bullpen really needed some help. I thought those were really solid additions. I think a veteran guy like Corey Kluber for the rotation, that's exactly what they needed. They needed more depth in that rotation. And now the depth, sure, there's question marks in that rotation, but If those guys are all healthy, you got depth for days in that rotation. Adam Duvall, right-handed power bat. That could be a great fit at Fenway Park. I mean, he's got to get back to what he was doing a couple of years ago. Had the wrist injury last year. Let's see if he's healthy. But overall, I did think these moves to the Red Sox were pretty decent. And now, I was not the biggest fan of Adalberto Mondesi, coming over to the Red Sox, mainly just because he has not been able to stay on the field. If he can stay on the field, if he is healthy, I think he could be a really solid player. This is a guy that has a bit of pop. He's got some speed. He's good on defense. We'll see how much he plays. It could end up being good, but we'll just have to wait and see. I thought it was an okay move. I wasn't the biggest fan of it. But in the end, I don't think the Red Sox really had that bad of an offseason. Xander Bogaerts, yes, that stunk seeing him go. I would have liked to have kept him around for longer, not 11 years, but I would have liked to have seen him stay in town. But in the end, I think the Red Sox had themselves a pretty good offseason. I'm going to go right in the middle here. I'm going to go a B. Moving on to the Chicago Cubs. I think they had themselves a pretty fun offseason, headlined by Dansby Swanson. You also brought in a big name like Cody Bellinger. Can he bounce back to that MVP form he had not too long ago? Adding Jameson Taillon for the rotation. They needed starting pitching. I thought that was a really solid move. Also bringing in some guys like Eric Hosmer. Let's see if Eric Hosmer can get back to what he was doing with Kansas City. Didn't do too much for my Red Sox in a short stint, but also bringing in Trey Mancini. Hey, I like some of these moves. Tucker Barnhart for catching depth. I think that was pretty good as well. You did lose Wilson Contreras, but I think you're going to be fine without him. You got some pretty decent bats there. In the end, I think this is a pretty fun off-season for the Chicago Cubs. I love the addition of Swanson. I'm going to give the Cubs an A. Moving on to the other side of Chicago, let's talk about the White Sox. The one big move they made was Andrew Benintendi. But other than that, not a whole lot. You did add Mike Clevinger, but now he's under investigation. We're going to have to wait and see what ends up happening with that. But not a whole lot going on. At this point, they still need a second baseman. I don't know what they're going to do there. They've been tied to Nicky Lopez with the Royals. I mean, I don't know if the Royals are going to trade him, but this is not a whole lot here. You lost Jose Abreu. Johnny Cueto was pretty decent for you last year. Elvis Andrus. I mean, I don't know. The White Sox, sure, they added Benintendi, but I feel like they've lost more at this point than they've gained. I don't know. I mean, sure, they've made a couple of additions, but I don't think the White Sox have really done all that much. I'm going to give them a D. Moving on to the Cincinnati Reds. It's kind of hard to grade the Reds at this point because they're in the middle of a rebuild, but I think they made some moves here. You added Will Myers. You got Kurt Casale, Luke Weaver for the rotation, but I did like that they were able to cut ties with Mike Moustakas. To me, he was just wasting a spot on the roster, so I think that was an addition by subtraction kind of a move. You did add a couple of young pieces. You did have a trade with the Twins where you sent Kyle Farmer over. You got a guy like Casey Lugamina, younger pitcher. Let's see if he can do anything. For the Reds, I don't know. It's kind of just hard to really grade them at this point. So, I don't know. I'll just go a C. Okay, I've made an audible. I've decided to add a no grade tier. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me that when the White Sox sign Andrew Benintendi, that the Reds are above them. I don't know. It's just too hard to grade the Reds, so I'm going to put them in the no grade tier. Moving on to the Cleveland Guardians. I think they had themselves a pretty decent offseason, most notably adding Josh Bell and Mike Zunino. I think that was a pretty good under-the-radar signing, but they needed some bats for this lineup. I think Josh Bell, switch hitter, right in the middle of the lineup. I think it's going to be a great addition here. And Mike Zunino, if he can get back to what he was doing with the Rays a couple of years ago, 30-plus home runs while also playing some great defense, I think this could end up being one of the more underrated signings this offseason. Again, they did exactly what they needed to do. Could they have maybe added some more starting pitching? Possibly. But I think the rotation seems fine as is. There were some rumors of Shane Bieber maybe being moved. Maybe that was more people trying to talk it into existence. So, I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see. But the bullpen still looks great. This Guardians team, I think, only got better. Did they make the most moves out there? Did they make the most flashy moves out there? No, I think they just made a couple of solid additions. So for me, I'm going to go with a B. Moving on to the Colorado Rockies. I'm going to be honest here, not a whole lot going on. Most notably, adding a guy like Nolan Jones. He wasn't really doing all that much for the Cleveland Guardians. He was a former top prospect. Let's see if that raw power can translate over to Coors Field. He could end up being a really good bat for the Rockies. But other than that, just not really a whole lot going on here. You added Pierce Johnson for the bullpen, but I don't know. You added Chris Bryant last offseason. They were linked with Pablo Lopez, Edward Cabrera at one point. They just didn't really do a whole lot for this team. I'm going to be honest. I'm going with an F for the Colorado Rockies. Moving on to the Detroit Tigers, a disappointing season in 2022 and not a whole lot this offseason. Most notably, though, making a trade with the Phillies, sending over Gregory Soto, and bringing back what I think was a pretty decent package of Matt Vierling, Nick Maton, and Donnie Sands. As of right now, Nick Maton is their projected everyday third baseman. Matt Vierling has good advanced numbers. If given a chance, I think he could end up being pretty decent for the Tigers. And hey, getting a younger catcher as well in Donnie Sands. You added a couple of free agents here in Lorenzen and Matthew Boyd. Him coming back to Detroit, it's a pretty nice story there. But other than that, not a whole lot. You know, they had their offseason last year, bringing in Javier Baez and Eduardo Rodriguez. Both those guys did not perform the way that was expected this past year, so they're counting on those guys bouncing back this year. You know, Eduardo Rodriguez went AWOL at one point last year, so let's see if he can be that steady guy like he was with the Red Sox. Spencer Torkelson, they're counting on having a better sophomore season. Riley Green, he showed a lot of promise last year. I think this Tigers team could be pretty sneaky this year. I would have liked for them to have done a little bit more. So overall, I just think for right now, I'm going to go with a D for the Tigers. On to the defending champion Houston Astros. Yes, they lost Justin Verlander, but they did sign Jose Abreu. I do think that's going to be a really nice addition for that lineup. You also brought back Michael Brantley on a one-year deal. At this point, I don't think he's ever going to leave Houston. And Rafael Montero had a great year last year, signed him up for 3 years. He's going to be just a great piece of that bullpen moving forward. Fantastic year last year. But other than that, not a whole lot for the Astros. A big loss in Verlander, but a pretty decent add in Jose Abreu, keeping Rafael Montero. Overall, I'm going to go with a B for the Astros. On to the Kansas City Royals. They were a bit more active than you might have noticed this past offseason, most notably signing Aroldis Chapman, a bit of a head-scratcher kind of a move. But if they can get him back on track, now I'm not saying get him back to what he was doing, 2015, 2016, when, helping the Cubs win a World Series, but if you could get him to be pretty decent from the left side again, who knows? You can just trade him at the trade deadline to a contender and get some prospects out of it. I thought that was a good move for the Royals in the end. But other than that, not a whole lot else. You got Ryan Yarbrough on a one-year deal. They did make some trades, bringing in some younger pitchers here like Steven Cruz, Evan Sisk, Jacob Wallace. Kind of more no names at this point, but who knows? Maybe they could develop these guys and they can turn into something down the road. You also added Josh Taylor. He was in the Mondesi trade where the Red Sox getting their shortstop, and all they had to give up was Josh Taylor. But Josh Taylor was a pretty decent arm for the Red Sox not too long ago. He could end up being a pretty good arm for the Kansas City Royals. They're still connected with Zach Greinke. I would imagine he could probably just end up going back there. I don't know. We're just going to have to wait and see what happens there. I think for the Royals, it's kind of hard here. I put the Reds in the no grade column. The Royals are still kind of in that weird, awkward spot where they're never really going to go out there and, make a huge, splashy signing. But they did make some moves. So I don't know. I feel like for Kansas City, I'll just go no grade at the moment. I don't know. But then again, I do like the Chapman move. I think for them, personally, I think for their own standards, I think you could say like a C. But for me, I'm just going to put Kansas City in the no grade column because they're kind of just in this awkward spot right now. But I did like the move of Chapman. That could end up getting them some prospects at the deadline. On to the LA Angels. Not really a whole lot of splashy signings. No trade of Shohei Ohtani. Let's see if he's still an Angel at the trade deadline. We'll have to wait and see. But for the Angels, made a couple of decent signings. I like the Tyler Anderson move. I think that's going to be a nice addition for the rotation. I like the Brandon Drury move. I think that's some flexibility within their infield. I think that's just going to be a pretty solid signing overall. You made a couple other moves. Carlos Estevez for the bullpen I thought was pretty decent. Justin Garza for the bullpen as well. Brett Phillips, bringing in for the bench. I thought these were some decent moves for the Angels overall. And as for the trade market, Hunter Renfroe, Gio Urshela, I thought those were pretty decent ads for them. I mean, in the end, this is a pretty good offseason for the Angels. Artie Moreno is coming back. He's not selling the franchise. I think that is a bit of a loss there. But for the Angels, not a bad offseason at all. Nothing flashy by any means. I'm going to go with a B. Moving on to the other team in LA, let's talk about the Dodgers. An interesting offseason for the Dodgers, and when I say interesting, I mean more underwhelming. We're not used to the Dodgers being this quiet. Freddie Freeman last offseason, Trevor Bauer 2 offseasons ago. Well, that didn't really work out all that much, cutting ties with him this offseason. I think if you ask them, they would say that is a win. But for the Dodgers, not a whole lot here. They made a couple of moves. JD Martinez, I think, is always a nice bat to bring in. I'm going to miss him. Noah Syndergaard for the back end of the rotation. Jason Hayward, that's a name, but minor league deal. Let's see if he can latch on with the major league club. But other than that, with the Dodgers, not a whole lot else. They did lose, most notably, Trey Turner and Justin Turner. No more Turners on the Dodgers. But, in the end, for the Dodgers, it's just not a whole lot here. I think they're really getting themselves ready for next offseason because they want Shohei Ohtani. I think they're getting themselves ready for that. But for the Dodgers this offseason, there's just not really a whole lot here. In the end, I'm going to go with a D for the Dodgers. On to the Marlins, and most notably, the big move for them was trading away Pablo Lopez. I like the addition of Luis Arraez, but the fact that they had to give up Pablo Lopez and one of their top prospects in Jose Salas, that is giving up a lot just for Luis Arraez. I think he's going to be a good addition for this lineup. I know a lot of Marlins fans out there, they're saying the Marlins won this trade or it was an even trade. The trade itself, they lost the trade, but they did get the player they needed to get, so it's not like they did bad. I'm not saying that, but in terms of values, they lost that trade. We'll just have to wait and see how Jose Salas turns out. But at the moment, I like that deal more for the Twins because they ended up getting a really good pitcher as well that's under control for a couple of years. But Luis Arraez under control for a few years. I think that's going to be a good addition for this lineup. It's what they needed. They needed a bat like this, so I like it overall. As for free agency, Johnny Cueto, I think this is a veteran guy. We got all these younger guys in the rotation. I think that's a really good ad. A veteran guy is never a bad idea. I think he's going to be great for the younger guys there. Also bringing in a Gene Segura. Did like that a lot. In the end, I like this offseason for the Marlins. Sure, having to give up Jose Salas, I wasn't a big fan of that move. But, hey, they got the bat that they needed, so I'm not gonna talk negatively about that, because when you need something and you got to go do what you got to do to go get it, hey, I'm okay with it in the end. But would have liked for the Marlins to maybe get a little bit more in that deal. In the end, I think for the Marlins, they had themselves a pretty decent offseason. I think this could end up being a pretty decent team next year. For the Marlins, I'm going to go with a B. On to the Milwaukee Brewers. The highlight for the Brewers this offseason, in my opinion, was acquiring William Contreras in that three-way Sean Murphy deal. The fact that they got William Contreras for this lineup, he was really good last year for the Atlanta Braves, and it felt like they kind of just landed in this trade by accident. It was kind of weird how it all came together. But taking a look at William Contreras last year, hit 278, a 354 on base, a 506 slugging, 20 homers, a 138 WRC+. No, he's not going to give you the most amazing defense out there, but he will get the job done. I really like this for the Milwaukee Brewers. Don't forget about them acquiring Jesse Winker as well. It did not work out with Seattle, but maybe Milwaukee can get him back on track. He is a bit of a wild card, but if he can get back to some of these numbers that he was putting up in the past with the Cincinnati Reds, man, this lineup could end up being really good. Overall, I did like this Milwaukee Brewers offseason. Again, most notably in the trade department here. But for the Brewers, I'm just going to go with yet another B. Even though the Mets ended up not getting Carlos Correa, they had a fantastic offseason led by the acquisition of Justin Verlander. Absolutely fantastic. Verlander and Scherzer atop of the rotation once again. I think that's going to be awesome. But it wasn't just Verlander. They added Kadai Senga. They added Jose Quintana for that rotation as well. This is looking like a pretty good starting rotation. 1 through 5, it looks awesome. Kadai Senga is a bit of a wild card, but the guy is great stuff. I think he's going to be just fine with the Mets. But it did not stop there. You brought in Omar Narvaez. This is going to be a good addition for the catcher position. Good defense from him. I thought that was really solid. But they brought back some guys as well. Edwin Diaz was one of the first guys to get off the board. They brought back Brandon Nimmo. Adam Ottavino is also back in the fold. You brought in David Robertson as well. Elisa Hernandez came in through a trade. Overall, what a fantastic offseason for the Mets. Again, Carlos Correa, that would have just been the cherry on top. I mean, my goodness, if you landed Carlos Correa, you could argue that's one of the best off seasons for a team of all time. But for the Mets, I don't see how you cannot put them at an S tier. On to the New York Yankees, and the story for the Yankees this offseason was Aaron Judge. It looked like he was going to the San Francisco Giants. Instead, Arson Judge went to San Francisco, but they brought him back on a 9-year, $360 million deal. They had to bring him back. If you did not have Judge in this lineup, my goodness, there just would have been the biggest hole in the lineup. I mean, there's no way you could have replaced Aaron Judge, but good thing they brought him back. It didn't stop there, though. They finally added the number 2 in the rotation that they have desperately needed for the last couple of years, Carlos Rodon. So Garrett Cole, Carlos Rodon, Severino, and then you got Cortez at the 4. I mean, you got Herman and Frankie Montes at the 5. This is a great looking rotation. 1 through 3, this is looking great for the postseason. You brought in Tommy Kahnle. This is a good clubhouse guy, good guy for the bullpen. I thought that was great bringing him back. But other than that, not really much else for the Yankees. They just made a couple of really good moves. In the end, for the Yankees, I'm going to go with an A tier. Believe it or not, the Oakland A's actually had a very busy offseason. If you go take a look at some of the free agents they acquired, they picked up Trevor May on a 1-year deal, Jace Peterson on a 2-year deal. But don't forget about Shintaro Fujinami coming over from Japan. He was in the same class as Shohei Ohtani. He was looking like one of the next best pitchers coming out of Japan, but in Japan wasn't really putting up the best numbers. He was having some up and down years, but he's been pretty good recently. I think he is a pretty under the radar guy. Keep an eye on Fujinami this coming year. But for the Oakland A's, now they made some questionable trades. Now they did bring in some pretty good pieces. If you go back to the Sean Murphy deal, they, I think, personally fell really short on that deal, especially for a guy like Sean Murphy. Now, you did get back some pretty good pieces. Kyle Muller was all around the best piece you got back. And then you brought in some, guys who maybe not all around great prospects, but they have some good, like 1 or 2 tools, like Freddie Tarnok, Royber Salinas. And then you also just traded away Cole Irvin. You brought in Darrell Hernandez. This guy, there's power, there's speed with him, but he hasn't shown much above A ball. So for the Oakland A's, they made a couple of trades. I just feel like they didn't get as much back as they could have. But hey, the Oakland A's, maybe they've done their homework and they really like some of these guys and they think these guys could end up being some good players down the road. For Oakland, again, a pretty busy offseason. It's not like they just sat back and kind of just let things happen. They did make some moves. For Oakland, again, the trades, I wasn't the biggest fan of them, but at least they're going out there and they're being active, going after some guys that they think could be impact players down the road. Made a couple of free agent signings. For Oakland, you know what? I'm feeling a little generous. I'll go a C for the Oakland A's. On to the Philadelphia Phillies. They were 2 wins away from a World Series championship. They ended up losing to the Astros, but this offseason, they kept their foot on the gas and they made some really good signings. Trey Turner, most notably. I mean, my goodness, just look at this lineup here. And this doesn't even have Bryce Harper in it. You got Trey Turner now at the top, one of the best shortstops in the game. Trey Turner, Schwarber, Hoskins, Real Muto, Castellanos. Hopefully he does a little better in his second year. But this is a good-looking lineup, even without Harper. When you got Harper back, my goodness, look out for the Philadelphia Phillies. But they ended up making a couple more moves as well. They brought in Taijuan Walker. Taijuan Walker, I think, will be fine as a back-end rotation kind of a guy. But, you got Nola and Wheeler up here, Suarez. I mean, I think the Phillies rotation is looking pretty good. Now, Zach Eflin ended up going to Tampa Bay, so I think that will be a bit of a loss. But I think Taijuan Walker will do enough to replace the production of Zach Eflin. And for the bullpen as well, you did bring in some guys to this bullpen. You are counting on Craig Kimbrell to maybe get back to his old self a little bit. He's a bit of a question mark. It wasn't bad last year. He just really kind of just stunk up the joint, a couple of times. But I think Craig Kimbrell can still be a pretty good piece in the bullpen. Gregory Soto, I talked about that trade earlier with the Tigers. Walks a lot of guys, but this is a guy who throws a ton of velocity from Gregory Soto. He's got good stuff, but he needs to get the walks down. Let's see if the Phillies can keep him in check. You also brought in Matt Strahm as well. I mean, what else is there to say? I mean, this is a really, really good offseason, especially when you're adding one of the top shortstops in the game. I mean, for the Phillies, I'm going to go S tier. I mean, when you add Trey Turner, I mean, my goodness, that to me already puts you up here, and then you just made all these other moves as well. So for the Phillies, S tier. You know, the Pittsburgh Pirates, they may not quite be there just yet, but you know what? They had a fun offseason. I really liked a lot of these moves the Pirates made. Andrew McCutchen coming back home. Rich Hill, I'll always love Rich Hill. Wherever he goes, I will always root for the team that he plays for. You brought in Austin Hedges, Vince Velasquez, Carlos Santana. Don't forget about a couple of trades that they made as well. Ji-Man Choi. I mean, this is not a bad offseason for the Pittsburgh Pirates. If we go take a look here at the lineup, this is a fun-looking lineup. I mean, I think that, you know, are they going to be contenders by any means? No, but I think this could end up being a pretty fun team. I mean, look at some of these names here. Brian Reynolds was in the rumor mill. Can they work out an extension with him? I don't know. I mean, I think that hurts their grade a little bit here as well. Because to me, I think if you want to keep someone like Brian Reynolds, you got to, you know, offer up a little bit more money than what they were offering. So let's see if they can work out something with him, or could they just end up trading him at some point down the road. But, you know, I think they could have maybe done a bit more with the pitching. But, you know, to give them credit, I mean, no one really wants to, none of these top players want to go to Pittsburgh, really. And is Pittsburgh really going to offer up any of that money? I don't know. But I think Pittsburgh could be a pretty fun team this year. You know, again, will they compete? I don't know. 62 and 100 last year. I could see them somewhere around this range, maybe like 74, maybe even 80 wins. I don't know. Maybe. Pittsburgh could be a fun team, but you know what? I liked the effort this offseason. I liked bringing in some of these names. And what I like about bringing in some of these names is that these are veteran guys. You got a lot of young guys on this team, in this organization. I think that's going to be really good for the young players. You know what? Like I said, I'm feeling generous. I'm going to go a B for the Pittsburgh Pirates. You know, not a lot of money going around in Pittsburgh, but they were out there, they were active, they were making some moves. I'm going to give them a B. On to the San Diego Padres, and it was headlined by the acquisition of Xander Bogaerts. Yes, I talked about the Xander Bogaerts deal earlier, 11 years. I was okay with him going to the Padres on an 11-year deal. Towards the back end of those kind of long-term contracts, they tend not to work out, but he will be a solid player for them, at least for the first half of that deal. So yeah, it does sting a little bit to see him in this lineup, but in the end, what can you do? He will be a really good player for the San Diego Padres. He's the kind of player that they need, a guy who's won a couple of World Series. I think he's going to have a big impact on this team, but it did not stop with him. Nelson Cruz, veteran guy. Hey, he's been in the postseason quite a lot in his past. Designated hitter. You know, what will he really do this coming year? 42 years old. Could you see a year like Albert Pujols had where he's putting up some solid numbers? We'll just have to wait and see. Then there's Matt Carpenter as well. I'm sure Matt Carpenter is going to get some DH time as well. But he was setting the world on fire with the Yankees until he got hurt. But overall, you know, I like these moves for the Padres. I mean, Xander Bogaerts is obviously the big one. Oh, don't forget about Seth Lugo as well, bringing him in. Will he end up being in the rotation? Will he be, you know, more of like a swingman or a bullpen guy? We'll have to wait and see. But either way, I like Seth Lugo. I thought that was a really solid acquisition. For the Padres, I'm going to go with an A. The Seattle Mariners took a step forward last year, going 90 and 72 and making the playoffs for the first time in a long time. And this year, they're trying to take another step. And they made a couple of moves, bringing in Teoscar Hernandez most notably. That's going to be a good bat for that lineup. And then also Colton Wong, a guy that hits from the left side. He's shown a good glove in the past. Not great defense last year, but I always love Colton Wong. If I have Colton Wong in my lineup, I'm feeling pretty good about it. I think these two guys are going to be a nice lift for the Mariners. But also, they traded, and for Teoscar Hernandez, they traded away Eric Swanson. He was a good bullpen arm, but I do think they have more than enough arms in this bullpen. I mean, they are lacking a lefty in this bullpen, so we'll have to wait and see how that turns out. But for the Mariners, hey, made a couple of solid additions with Teoscar Hernandez and Colton Wong. Nothing flashy. I thought they maybe could have added, you know, something on the free agent market. They were after Trey Turner at one point, ended up going to the Phillies, but for the Mariners, I'm going to go with a B. On to the San Francisco Giants, and man, oh man, when will they be able to land that big name? They swung and missed on Aaron Judge. They did have Carlos Correa. They did land the big name, but they decided to pull out of the deal. They weren't comfortable with the physical. He ended up going to the Twins. Well, actually, he went to the Mets, and then he went to the Twins, but I'm not really going to rag on the Giants for that. They pulled out of the deal. It is what it is. But the Giants, hey, even though they ended up not landing a couple of big names, they still went out there and they made some moves. Bringing in for the offense, Michael Conforto. You brought in Mitch Haniger as well. You know, hey, you didn't land one of those two big names, but maybe these two guys who are coming off injuries, maybe they could have big years, and then that could maybe come close to equaling the production of, say, a Correa or Judge. I don't know, but not very likely. But at least they went out there and they brought in a couple of notable names. So we'll have to see how they do bouncing back from injuries. As for the rotation, you did lose Carlos Rodon, but instead of Rodon, they replaced him with Stripling and Manaea. Stripling was really solid last year. I think it was a bit underrated. Manaea, he's shown good stuff in the past. The Giants have a good history of getting guys back on track. So we'll have to see. Can these two guys come close to equaling the production that Rodon did last year? We'll have to just wait and see. As for the bullpen, Luke Jackson, Taylor Rogers. So the Giants were out there. They were out there making moves. So I'm going to give them credit, but they didn't get, there's question marks here. Like I said, Conforto, Haniger, injury histories, Sean Manaea coming off of a bad year, they're guys here, but it's still a question mark at this point. I think for the Giants, the fact that they weren't able to land just like a really good player that is going to bring something to this team in a big way, that definitely feels like there's something to be desired here for the Giants. So I think some people could say a B. For me, I'm going to go with a C overall. Just the fact that they weren't able to land Judge. Could they have gone a little further with the contract, maybe outbid the Yankees, I don't know, $20 million or so? Could they have maybe landed him if they offered him a bit more? Who knows? But for the Giants, I feel like a C is the right spot. For the St. Louis Cardinals, not a whole lot this offseason, but they did find their next catcher, Wilson Contreras. They're very familiar with him, playing with the Cubs for all these years. But other than that, really not much else. I felt like they could have used some pitching, but they just decided really not to go that route. They were involved in the Pablo Lopez talks at one point. Some murmurs were coming up about Shane Bieber at a couple of points. In the end, the Cardinals, I feel like this offseason it just feels like they really left a lot out there. I feel like they could have made some more moves. Wilson Contreras, yeah, that's going to be a good bat for the lineup, but I feel like there was more to be done here. For the Cardinals, I'm going to go with a C. The Tampa Bay Rays are always hard to grade because they're always making these little acquisitions. Look at all the trades that the Rays made. There are some players here that do show some pretty good tools when you look at the scouting reports, but a lot of these guys, very far away from maybe, really contributing to this team. So we'll just have to wait and see how these players end up developing. As for free agency, hey, give them some credit. They made their biggest free agent acquisition in their history by signing Zach Eflin to a 3-year deal. And 3 years, $40 million is a franchise record. That is hilarious to me. But hey, it's the Tampa Bay Rays. But other than that, a lot of minor league deals. This is what the Rays do. They're always hard to grade when it comes to the offseason because, sure, they have recently gone after, like Freddie Freeman last offseason. So they have been willing to, maybe spend a little bit of cash. But, they did sign a couple of extensions. Fairbanks, Springs, 3-year deal for Fairbanks, 4-year deal for Springs. But again, the Rays, they're just kind of hard to grade. I think you could, just based off of what they ended up getting in terms of major league players, a C. Could you put them at not graded? I don't even know for the Tampa Bay Rays. I'll just go put them at a C for now. When it came to major league talent, they didn't really add a whole lot. Just Zach Eflin. So I'll give them credit. They did go out there and spend some money. But a lot of these guys, they are question marks. Minor league deals, trades, bringing in some pretty decent prospects. I'll just go in the middle. I'll go with C. The Texas Rangers needed pitching this offseason, and boy, oh boy, did they address that, landing arguably the best pitcher in the entire galaxy, Jacob deGrom, easily their ace moving forward. A 5-year deal, a lot of moolah going to Jacob deGrom. Will he be able to stay healthy? Hey, I don't think they would have given him that big of a deal if they weren't confident about his health moving forward. He did look fine down the stretch when he came back after his scapula exploded with the Mets last year. But hey, I think Jacob deGrom, again, this is one of the best pitchers in the world. This is a huge signing for them. Also bringing in Nathan Eovaldi, bringing in Andrew Heaney. You brought back Martin Perez. Again, the pitching looks great. As for the lineup, they could have used another outfielder out here. They have been connected with Brian Reynolds. Could there still be a deal possibly done before the start of the season? We'll just have to wait and see. But hey, I think the Rangers, based off of all the pitching that they added, also Jake Odorizzi, I forgot about him as well. Danny Duffy recently, it actually just happened not too long ago. Hey, great offseason for the Texas Rangers. They went out there to go target pitching, and they landed some really good pitching. Hey, maybe this might be a bit of a stretch here. I'm going S tier for the Rangers. When you can add someone like Jacob deGrom, hey man, that's S tier. That's an S tier move for me. I loved the offseason that the Minnesota Twins had, most notably bringing back Carlos Correa. He went to 2 different teams. He went to the Giants and the Mets. But in the end, going back to the Twins, what I love about that is that the Twins, hey, they basically said goodbye to him twice, and they just stayed patient, and they ended up coming back. They didn't make any, rash decisions. They didn't go out there and make any reactionary kind of moves. They just hung back, and they just waited it out. And in the end, they got the face of the franchise moving forward. I think some people would say Byron Buxton is the face of the franchise, but to me, Carlos Correa faced the franchise. Good contract as well for both sides. You have the incentives at the end. You have the vesting options at the end for Correa and for the Twins. They have a bit of a safety net there. To me, this is a great signing for the Minnesota Twins. Absolutely love it. But that wasn't it. Now, you have Joey Gallo here. This is going to be an interesting one because there will be no shift moving forward. Will that help Gallo moving forward? It seemed like the Twins were fully confident because they brought this guy in pretty early. They brought him in early December. So they must feel a certain way about Joey Gallo. If he can get back to the power numbers that he was putting up a couple of years ago, boy, oh boy, this could be a really fun signing overall. But I love the addition of Christian Vasquez. Here comes the giraffe neck Robbie. Comments down below. But I love Christian Vasquez. I think he's an intangible kind of a guy. He's a leader. He's just a guy you want to have on your team. He's one of the best catchers in the game. He's not going to give you a lot of offense, but he's going to give you good defense. He works with the pitchers extremely well. I love that signing overall. And then on the pitching side, Pablo Lopez. I mean, I love Pablo Lopez. You got to remember, he's not even 27 years old yet. He's getting close to 27, but he's not even 27. He had, people will say he had a bad second half last year, but if you go look at the FIP in his second half last year, it was really good. The ERA was in the 5s, but the FIP was in the mid to high 3s. Pablo Lopez, I think, is going to end up being really good for the Minnesota Twins. I absolutely love that. And you have him for 2 years. And you had to give up Luis Arraez, but to me, I think they had more than enough, to keep the offense still at a high level, even without Luis Arraez. So I think overall the Twins had themselves a really good offseason. They added bats, they added defense, they added guys that can work with the pitching. You added a guy who could be your ace moving forward. The rotation is looking good. Could they have maybe done a bit more here, added something a bit more for the bullpen? Yeah, but remember, they added Jorge Lopez at the trade deadline last year. You got Duran here. I really like the Twins. I think they're a really good-looking team. I think they had a really good overall offseason. I'm going S tier. When you can add a guy, like a face of the franchise kind of a guy, bringing back Carlos Correa, a guy in Gallo who could end up being one of the most underrated signings this entire offseason because there will be no shift. Christian Vasquez, a guy that's going to bring leadership to the team. Defense works well with pitchers. You brought in a top of the rotation guy with Pablo Lopez. I know a lot of people think Pablo Lopez is a bit overrated. I think Pablo Lopez could still tick into that higher gear. I think you could see Pablo Lopez be a 4-win, a 4 F-WAR kind of a guy next year. I think the Twins had a really good offseason. They got lucky with Carlos Correa, but they were patient with it. They let him come to them. And in the end, the Twins, for me, they get an S. Speaking of off seasons that I love, the Toronto Blue Jays had a very good offseason, most notably bringing in Dalton Varsho. I love Dalton Varsho. This is a good all-around player. He's going to give you some good offense, some good pop. Needs to get the on-base and the batting average a little higher. This is a guy he can hit for power, 27 home runs last year, but he can play some great defense out there. He's got speed as well, over 25 stolen bases last year. Dalton Varsho, very underrated in this game, and I think he's going to bring some grit to this team. Speaking of grit, Kevin Kiermaier. Now, what is he going to give you on the stat sheet? I'm not quite sure, but this is a guy, hard-nosed player, a leader kind of a guy. I think Kevin Kiermaier, this is going to be a good addition for this team. I think he's going to be good for the team chemistry. Brandon Belt, this is a guy who's been through a lot. He has been on some good teams with the San Francisco Giants, a lefty bat. And speaking of lefty bats, all 3 of these guys are lefties. Now, this lineup is looking a lot more balanced. Brandon Belt, if he can get back to his pre-injury numbers, my goodness, Brandon Belt, this could be a really good addition. As for the rotation, bringing Chris Bassett. If you notice all these guys that they brought in, gritty, just hard-nosed players that just like to go out there, get dirty, and compete. Now, I loved these moves to the Toronto Blue Jays. Now, the one thing they are lacking is like a higher profile free agent. Could they have, they were in supposedly on the Justin Verlander sweepstakes. They were in some races there for some names. In the end, didn't land, the biggest name out there, but they brought in just some really solid guys. Dalton Varsho, a great addition to me. I think for the Blue Jays, just a solid A. I'm telling you, look out for the Blue Jays this year. Last but not least, the Washington Nationals. Where the Nationals are at right now, they're not looking to be adding any big-time free agents or making any big-time trades. They're trying to rebuild that farm a little bit, try and get some of these young guys up to the major leagues. But they did add some notable names, most notably Jeimer Candelario. This is a guy, he's had some success in the past with the Detroit Tigers. Let's see what he can do there. You brought in some other notable names like Alex Colomé, Corey Dickerson, Dominic Smith, Michael Chavis. So, hey, some Trevor Williams as well for the rotation. But, for the Nationals, they're just going out there. They made some moves. Maybe some of these guys can have some good first halves. Maybe you could deal them at the deadline, get some more prospects. That's what the Nationals really need to be focusing on. So for me, I'm going to go with an NG, no grade, because I think for the Nationals, they're just going out there and just doing what they got to do at the moment. What's going to happen with ownership? Are they going to sell sooner rather than later? We'll just have to wait and see. But everyone, these are my grades for the offseason. Let me know what you think down below in the comments. Do you think any of these teams should move up, down? Do you think these are good grades? Do you think I'm an absolute moron? Let me know down below in the comments. But that's all I have for right now, everyone. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you next time.